I grew up with a dining table that doubled as an arbitration chamber. Everybody had an opinion and expected me to referee it and to pay for the snacks. That table is the reason I left town at 22 with a battered suitcase, 2 internships, and the kind of stubborn that will outlast winter. 37 now, I run a mid-sized tech company that makes sensible money and sensible decisions, and I live in a condo that no one back home would ever be able to afford to keep clean. For the purposes of this story, my name is Jeanne, and my family hasn't spoken to me like a normal family for years. The estrangement wasn't a single dramatic event, so much as a slow leak. My parents were small business folks who believed loyalty was paid in favors and expectations. Cousins were excellent at cheerful theft, not the dramatic kind that goes to prison, but the habitual, can you spot me and remember when you made bank kind of theft. I was the kid who studied while everyone else partied. I became the one who got the job, then the promotion, then the company. The more successful I got, the louder the congratulations sounded like invoices. Invitations arrived when I had a new car, a new promotion, or a new investor on the cap table. Complaints about how the family used to be were matched by texts asking if I could cover a little emergency, the same cousins who hadn't called for birthdays in 5 years. That pattern hardened into a wall. I stopped answering group texts. I declined the family reunion that year I had to present to our biggest client. When Mom called to nag about everything from my hair to my stock options, I rerouted the call to voicemail and remodeled my kitchen. It wasn't about being bitter. It was about boundaries that they kept ignoring. The final fracture was when one cousin used my company's vendor contacts to get a side gig and then pretended they'd always been the one with connections. I sent a short email. Stop using my name. Respect my boundaries. They called me icy. They called me ungrateful. I called it closure. For years, that was enough. I traded family dinners for investor dinners and awkward holiday small talk for product roadmaps. Still, human habits are hard to kill. There's a soft tissue somewhere behind the sternum that remembers Sunday dinners and the way my mother used to fold napkins into swans when I was a kid. Add to that a holiday, Labor Day, unhelpfully nostalgic, and a text from my aunt. Dinner? It's been too long. The text had a little heart emoji and a "we miss you" that smelled faintly of paper plates and passive aggression. I almost deleted it. I almost wrote back, "No thanks." Instead, I did 3 things that felt dangerously sentimental and mildly strategic. First, I Googled the restaurant to confirm it was not a chain that masquerades as expensive. Second, I told myself this was a reconnaissance mission. Third, I asked one question nobody in my family answers honestly. Who's paying? Their reply was a chorus of polite detachment. It's on us. No, it's my treat. The kind of non-answer that actually means we don't know how to ask and we don't know how to pay. That should have been my cue to decline. Instead, something stranger guided me. Curiosity. If I had built anything worth a damn, it was not just my bank account, but a sense of timing and assessment. I wanted to see them. I wanted to know if the people I grew up with were capable of changing, or if the compliments would still come wrapped in invoices. So I said yes. I put on a dress that felt like armor without being armor, told my executive assistant I'd be unreachable for 2 hours, and drove toward the restaurant with an odd mixture of apprehension and clinical interest, like a scientist returning to a lab that once burned down. The stakes, in my head, were small and enormous at once. A dinner could be nothing, or it could be the opening move in a game I hadn't realized I was still playing. Either way, I would go armed with 2 things I'd learned running a company: listen more than you talk, and never assume generosity is free. They led me to a corner table that felt like a stage. Crystal glasses caught the light and sent it in shrapnel across the tablecloth. The menu was the size of a small novel and smelled faintly of butter and bad decisions. I sat down and tried to remember how to be casual with people who equated small talk with invoices. Conversation landed somewhere between surface nostalgia and performance art. "Jeanne, we're so proud," my aunt said, like a viceroy bestowing a meaningless medal. "We keep up with your company." Absolutely killing it. My cousin Trevor, who'd once asked to borrow my notes for a midterm and never returned them, clapped like someone trying to start a slow clap at the wrong beat. Compliments arrived in shiny wrappers. "You're such an inspiration," which translated, in their dialect, to "please consider funding our next bold scheme." The orders began like a soft rain and escalated to full-on flooding. Lobster tails arrived with theatricality. Someone suggested the chef's tasting. 3 of them said yes in unison, as if taking the tasting would prove they were sophisticated. We were midway through a dish that involved foam and a garnish that seemed to double as confetti when my second cousin announced the wine. The 2016 Reserve? And the waiter's eyebrows made a small climb toward the ceiling. Everything tasted expensive. So did the pauses between sentences. Every time a plate arrived, another compliment was lobbed at me like a coin tossed into a fountain, admiring my vision, chuckling about how I must be ruthless. The jokes were meant to be flattering, but landed like admission forms. They wrapped their requests in praise, the way someone might tuck a handbill into the pages of a book so you'd read both. They weren't subtle about inserting themselves into my orbit. My aunt described how she'd just started a small online boutique, a boutique that sounded exactly as small as the receipts they'd soon be passing around. Trevor explained his consulting gig that was somehow always short-term and forever asking for favors. Every revelation came with a follow-up. It's just until we get off our feet, or I'd never ask if it weren't important. I kept my comments bland and neutral, questions like a line of sentry posts. "That's great. Really? How's that going?" My insides tightened each time they pronounced my name with a syllable meant to sound like reverence. Their tone said, "You've arrived. Now fund our ascent." Between a shared plate of something alarmingly sculptural and a dessert that could have doubled as contemporary art, the compliments and requests braided together into a single rope I could feel tightening. They praised what I'd built, and then, with the same breath, used that praise as leverage to remind me of how they were also doing something, and how nice it would be if I could help a little. When the table fell quiet for a minute, the restlessness in the room felt deliberate. They were preparing their pitch in the hushed, rehearsed way people do before asking for money. The waiter walked by, refilled a glass, and left a faint impression of incense and the faint metallic hint of a pending bill. I chewed my last bite slowly, listening to the clink of silver and the low hum of their gratitude, which didn't feel like gratitude at all. It felt like interest on a debt that had never been owed. The check arrives in a leather folder like an accusation. The waiter sets it down with the reverence of someone delivering a verdict. A soft click, a polite cough, the small, practiced smile people use when they know money is involved and they'd rather not be the one to stare at the math. I open it. $6,700, my aunt says before I can even look up. She speaks it like a benediction and a dare. For a beat, I can't parse whether she's proud, embarrassed, or trying to make the number sound like nothing. The folder smells faintly of lemon cleaner and the kind of expense account blandness I'm used to seeing in boardroom receipts. Around me, plates sit half cleared. Someone has trimmed a garnish into neat, childish crescents. Trevor is rearranging his napkin with the sort of fidget that says he is calculating how to angle the conversation toward someone else's wallet. "Wait," I say. And this is the curious, patient pause I use in meetings when a proposal is clearly delusional. $6,700. "Yes," Aunt says, still smiling. We went for the tasting menus and a few bottles. So," she trails off, which is their cue to hope I'll finish the sentence with, "It's on me." The old script, the old choreography. Praise, then ask. Praise, then invoice. I ask for the breakdown because part of me is a manager, and part of me is a person who needs to see the numbers to very thoroughly not be manipulated. The waiter slides me a printed receipt with a polite indentation for a signature. I scan it not because I don't believe them, but because I believe her in data. There are tasting menus flagged as chef's selection, wine bottles marked up as if they'd been bottled with golden tickets, and a few items that read like experiments in decadence. The total is very clearly $6,700. "Right," I say. "Okay." I put the folder back. My voice is steady. People who build companies learn to keep their faces neutral while their heads does 30 different calculations. I do the simplest thing possible. I pay for my own portion. It's family, Jeanne, Trevor says quickly, trying to wrap humility around the request like bubble wrap. Come on, it's been a while. We'll pay you back. He says, pay you back as if time is elastic and unpaid IOUs are currency. Pay me back? I repeat. When? Aunt leans forward. Don't be ridiculous. You can afford it. You've done so well. It looks bad for us to be asking, but there it is, the old leverage, compliments used as cover. They've rehearsed this half-sincere, half-apologetic posture for years. The ask is a practiced art form. Make the other person feel both flattered and responsible. I pull my card out and hand it to the waiter for my share. It's not theatrical. There's no flourish. I sign for my portion and leave the folder closed on the table between us like a small, quiet statement. You're not going to help? My cousin says, like someone trying to hide an accusation with anger. I paid for my food, I say. I keep the language clinical. I will not cover everyone else. A sudden flurry of pitches follows, each softer and more urgent than the last. They try to save face, even as they beg. It's just this once, Aunt says. We'll sort it out. We'll mortgage the house, Jeanne, you owe us, Trevor says, retrieving the old script as if reading a long familiar play. You left. We supported you when you left. This is family. The "we supported you" line hangs in the air like a moth-eaten banner. I remember the loan requests I'd answered in my 20s, the favors granted that were forgotten as easily as a forwarded email. I remember birthdays they missed, presentations they never asked about, calls that turned into voicemail. I remember the cousin who'd used my contacts and then edited out my name when the deal closed. You supported me by not showing up, I say. Support is a thing people do without an invoice. Asking me now at the end of a $600-700 meal is not support. They shift tactics. Pride wrestles with need. Aunt adopts the wounded voice of a martyr. We're not asking you to pay for everything. Just help us out. This will ruin us. You don't have to be like this. Like what? I ask. Like someone who can be depended on when it's inconvenient? Like someone who gives compliments and then expects a check? Trevor's face goes flinty for a second. Then he softens. You're being ungrateful. The accusation is almost exactly what I expected. It's simultaneously an attempt to guilt me into paying and a defensive shield designed to stop any rebuttal. They use the word ungrateful as if gratitude and finance have the same accounting logic. I laugh once, low and disbelief-laced. Ungrateful, I echo. For the family that vanished when I was starting? For the people who ask for help only when it looks public? For the people who confuse praise with payment? That's rich. They call me names between sobs and forced smiles. Cold, selfish, unfeeling. Aunt's lower lip trembles in the practiced way people use to make themselves appear smaller and more deserving of generosity. Trevor angles his shoulder toward me, the posture of someone who thinks proximity equals moral leverage. I'm not angry in the melodramatic way I sometimes fantasize about. I'm tired, and there's a calmness that comes from a life spent making difficult decisions. I know the cost of acquiescing, a precedent that would turn me into an ATM wearing a dress. So I stand up. I'm leaving, I say. I paid my share. You'll have to figure out the rest. They protest in chorus, voices thick with indignation and embarrassment. They try bargaining. Could you maybe, just 50%? We'll pay the rest. It's the classic step toward codependency. Start by splitting the cost, end by sharing the burden of every future misstep. No, I say. I won't. I take my purse, the click of the zipper a small punctuation. I slide my chair back and feel the weight of every year that led to this moment. Study sessions, hard calls at 2 a.m., board meetings where I said no. I feel the odd, sweet relief that comes when you close a door you've been holding ajar for someone else. They call after me. Jeanne, you're making a scene. You're being cruel. Do you not love us? I leave their questions trailing behind me like a scarf. Outside, the night is sharp and ordinary. I walk to my car with my shoulders unshrinking, the interior of the restaurant humming behind me with the sound of purses being opened and voices recalculating. My phone buzzes once with a text from Trevor. We thought family meant something to you. I read it, put the phone away, and start the engine. I step out into the night with the leather folder still warm on the restaurant table and the aftertaste of a dish I didn't want to have to pay for. The glass doors sigh shut behind me like a final punctuation. For a second, I just stand under the street lamp and listen. Through the window, their voices are a thin movie soundtrack. Urgent, messy, human. The first sound is zipper. A practiced, embarrassed rustle as purses are upended. Coins tap like a small percussion section. Someone curses softly. Someone else says, "I know I had cash," like they're casting spells. Then the phones come alive. Half-whispered calls, hands cupping mouths, the familiar staticky shuffle you hear when Dignity is trying to make a call on a cheap network. I can hear one cousin's voice, too loud with effort, announcing to a friend, "Hey, can you spot us like $3,000? We'll, pay you back next week." The word three sounds unreal, like a bad punchline. Aunt is rummaging for cards. I hear the polite click of a wallet being opened and the softer click that follows when a card is declined. A polite silence on the other end, the embarrassed laugh that tries to sound like a joke. Someone else is muttering into a phone about a money transfer that didn't clear. And then, quieter, "Check under the seat. I always forget there's cash." Trevor paces. I can see the outline of him through the frosted glass. Hands on hips, 1 foot tapping. The picture of a man suddenly learning that pride doesn't pay for wine. He makes a call with the exact tone people use when they're calling a parent to tell them they forgot graduation tuition. The word mortgage floats out and lands like an accusation. There's a brief comic scramble as the waiter returns with a stack of napkins and a small leather folder that looks like a talisman gone wrong. He sets it down and murmurs something politely apologetic about how they'll make it right. Aunt insists, voice shrill at the edges, that someone will run to the ATM. A chorus, footsteps, keys, the low rumble of handbags being frantically searched. And then, like a tiny chorus of confessions, I hear the excuses. We didn't mean to. It's just this once. I let the words sink in. They sound small in a room that just ordered foie gras. They sound ridiculous in the way a coin rattling in a jar sounds ridiculous next to a safe. I stand there another minute, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel. An absence that was pleasantly empty. The scramble is humiliating, yes, but it's also clarifying. It's the sound of leverage dissipating into the night. They are, quite literally, counting what they have and what they don't. I count what I have and what I don't need to give. A woman at the next table, not mine, a stranger who'd somehow become part of the soundtrack, leans over and says something to her companion. I can't make out the words, but her face is kind in a way my family used to be when we were poorer and kinder by default. The contrast hits like a cool breeze. I get in my car. My phone buzzes. Trevor's name. "We thought family meant something to you." I read it, thumb hovering over reply. There are about 100 snappy comebacks in my head, some deliciously petty, some executive-level cold. I put the phone away. A half hour of melodrama is not worth scripting a revenge novel out of. I drove. Driving away, I let the streetlights slide past in a steady rhythm. I don't feel triumphant in a shouty way. I feel something steadier. Relief, the uncomplicated calm that comes when you stop funding other people's illusions. Behind me, the restaurant's windows glow like a stage where actors are doing last-minute rewrites. Ahead, the road is ordinary and mine. Later that night, in the quiet of my kitchen with a cup of something hot and properly unostentatious, I think about what happened and what it meant. Revenge sometimes is a gunshot. Sometimes it's a closed door. This one was a quietly slammed door. I didn't humiliate them publicly. I didn't brand them on social media. I simply refused to be the bank they'd been rehearsing for. And that refusal had effects more interesting than any headline I could have crafted. It made them show their true faces in live color. It saved me from erasing my own boundaries. And it taught them, painfully, immediately, that compliments don't pay tabs. I slept like someone who'd finally returned something that had never been theirs to give. In the morning, the group text bloomed with performative outrage and fake sorrow. Someone suggested that maybe we could all chip in later. Trevor sent a follow-up text that read simply, "Sorry." I read it, let it sit for a beat, and then tapped 3 words, "You'll be fine." I didn't gloat. I didn't plan a petty flourish. I closed the thread, made coffee, and opened my inbox to the kind of emails that actually require attention. Contracts, product updates, a note from an investor. The world I'd built, the one that had once been used as a measuring stick, hummed on. It didn't need to be purchased with my dignity. That night, as I locked the door, I felt the strange and small human luxury of being free from owing anyone anything they'd never earned. The bill sat like an ugly bookmark in my memory. It wouldn't be the last time they tried the performance. It probably wouldn't even be the last time I was asked for money. But for the first time in a long while, I was the person making the decisions about what family actually required of me, and it felt, I'll admit it, quietly delicious.